Okay, so in Dreamweaver, we're going to do a two-column CSS layout from scratch. The only thing is I've already got an empty HTML page open, but just going to be using divs, no tables. So to start with, we need to have something that holds the page together, basically the two columns side by side. And we refer to that as a page wrapper or a container. So I'm going to create a div, and I'm going to give it an ID page wrapper. And I'll go over to my CSS palette, click on the plus to add a rule. There's the ID page wrapper being picked up. Click OK, and I'll set the width to 960 pixels. Okay. I'll put my cursor inside that area right after the word here and put in the next div. And I'll call this div, I'll give it an ID of sidebar 1. I'll go over to CSS. Make sure the ID is just sidebar. And I'll give it a width of 240 pixels. I'll also give it a background color so that you could see exactly where this sidebar is being placed. Okay. Now I need to have my cursor outside of the sidebar, and sometimes Dreamweaver has a hard time allowing you to select outside, so I'm just going to click on the edge of sidebar and press the right arrow key on my keyboard. And visually, in the design view, it looks like the cursor may still be in the sidebar, but if you look at code view, you'll see that the cursor is outside. So I'll add a new div, and I'll call this one content. I'll click OK, and you'll see that the div goes underneath the sidebar. Notice in the code that the divs are not contained within each other. That's very important, that they're two separate divs. I'll click plus on CSS so that I have the selector of content. I'll give this div a background as well, just so that we can see where it is. And for width value, I'll say 680. And I'll click apply. Okay, so now I've got two divs and I want them to be side by side. I'm going to affect the sidebar. I need to go to the rule for sidebar 1, and I'm going to go to the box category and say float left, and you'll see that the sidebar is now floating, which means above. Think of like if you're floating in the ocean, you're going to be above or on top. So the the content div is underneath the sidebar 1. I'll click OK. And then what we can do is go to content and say over here there's two methods. One, the sidebar 1 is 240 pixels wide, and if we want to add a 20 pixels margin to that in front of content, we can say simply left margin 260, and you'll see that we get a 20 pixel margin. Okay. Now this method leaves the content div in the flow of the document. Anytime something floats, it becomes above the document or out of the flow of the document. If I look at the code, the way the browser kind of is interpreting this is that content is actually at the top of this div, so that's why it moved up underneath. It's as if it's following the word here. Now another option, a little trickier, is to not put a margin on the left at this point. You'll see that the content is underneath sidebar 1, just the actual text isn't allowed to go underneath, but the div is. And we can also float content on the left. Okay, you'll see that page wrapper collapses. We'll fix that in a moment. You'll see that the outline is actually above these two divs. But what's important to note is that content is now floating and it's at the same level as sidebar 1. So if I put a margin on the left of 20, you'll see that it's simply just right next to sidebar 1 and moving over 20 pixels. It's because they're floating at the same level. Click OK. Now, as far as fixing this page wrapper, if we go to page wrapper and if we watch, if I want to put something inside, I'll say hello and click, you'll see it's actually above our two floating divs. Floating means above, out of the flow of the document. So it's as if this hello is actually following the word here, and we see that visually. So a little trick, there's a few different ways to do this. Eric Meyer is a great reference. If you look up anything like ClearFix in Google, you'll see and find some code. I'm just going to put something quite simple, and it's just a break tag with a style clear of both. And I'll finish off that tag like so. And now, essentially, there's something following our floating divs, and the command clear is sort of like saying stop the float. So now if I put in a word hello after that break, you'll see that it is now following these two divs. So that's how you make a simple two-column layout. You can put a header div above, you can put a footer div below. Main part to note is that if you're going to float both of the columns, make sure you have something in place like a break, style clear both, following to stop the floating.